United States and China in conflict. Europe takes the hit. A geopolitical earthquake and the late awakening of an old continent. Welcome back to the Clown News. Today, I will not be telling jokes. Reality outside is already tragic and absurd enough. Today, we are going to dive into the macro picture, analyze the psychology of the great powers, and expose the core reasons behind Europe's deadlock, a continent being crushed between two giants. When the plates of power start to move. To understand why we are sitting here today, looking at the world map and sighing over the fate of Paris, Berlin, or Brussels, we need to rewind the tape of history a little, not to memorize dates, but to see the sweet trap that Europe has willingly stepped into over the past 30 years. For 3 decades since the fall of the Berlin Wall, Europe has been living in a paradise-like dream. They believed in a kind of secular religion called the end of history. They believed that trade would dissolve all hatred, that if you buy gas from Russia and sell cars to China, peace will naturally follow. They believed that the United States would forever be the generous big brother, always ready to pay for Europe's security and asking for nothing more than ritual loyalty. But then that beautiful script was torn apart. The world was not flat as they imagined. It was uneven, sharp-edged, and full of power traps. And when harsh reality hit, the title of the new chapter in human history was simple. The United States and China are fighting. Europe takes the hit.
Welcome to the Clown News, your destination for dynamic perspectives on economics, technology, and financial investment. From market fluctuations to intriguing social trends, we bring the world to you through in-depth analyses. It's not just news, but a lens to help you understand the world that is shaping today.
The rise of protectionism and a slap from Washington. Let us start with the United States. If you think the pressure on Europe only began under Donald Trump, you are badly mistaken. Trump was only the man who threw the glass onto the floor to make noise. The current underneath had shifted long before. After many decades playing global policeman and opening its market generously to nurture allies, the United States began to feel exhausted. Washington realized that while it was busy protecting international sea lanes, its own middle class was being hollowed out by globalization. And who gained from this? A rising China and a prosperous Europe that had been free riding under the American security umbrella, using its budget instead for social welfare. This shift in United States strategic thinking was the first turning point that left Europe crushed between two giants. United States administrations, whether Republican or Democrat, now share a rare consensus: America first. This is not just a campaign slogan, it is a new economic doctrine. Look at the Inflation Reduction Act IRA. The name sounds macroeconomic and domestic. In essence, it is an uppercut aimed straight at European industry. The United States has launched hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for producers of electric vehicles, batteries, and green energy on the condition that production takes place in North America. What does that mean? It is like a gigantic vacuum cleaner sucking investment capital out of Europe and into America. The industrial flagships of Germany and France, the pride of the old continent, are forced to choose: stay at home and endure sky-high energy costs, or move to the United States to enjoy tax incentives and cheap energy. When Volkswagen considers building a plant in the United States instead of Germany, when Europe's largest chemical groups announce cuts at home, the picture becomes very clear. The United States wants to fight China by reviving domestic manufacturing, but the stray bullets from this war are lodged directly in the lungs of the European economy. Washington no longer sees Europe as an equal partner to be carefully supported. In the eyes of United States policymakers today, Europe is a buffer zone. The United States demands that Europe join its technological crusade against China. Ban the export of advanced chip-making tools such as ASML's lithography machines to China. Do it. Ban Huawei. Do it. Europe complies because it depends on American security, but the price it pays is the loss of economic autonomy. Europe becomes a disposable pawn on the chessboard, where it is crushed between two giants not only in markets, but in its ability to shape its own future. China, from the WORLDS factory to a nightmare competitor. If the United States is the giant angrily reclaiming its interests, China is the giant quietly tightening the noose. For many years, the relationship between Europe and China was defined by complementarity. Europe had advanced technology, China had cheap labor. Germany designed the machines, China assembled them. A perfect commercial marriage. But Beijing never intended to remain a mere assembler. With the Made in China 2025 strategy, China climbed the global value chain at astonishing speed. And this is when the tragedy of the United States and China fighting while Europe takes the hit entered a harsher chapter. Today, China does not need European technology as much as it used to, but Europe depends on China more than ever. Why? Because Europe has staked its entire future on the Green Deal. They want to become the first carbon-neutral continent, a noble and humanitarian goal and also a naive one. To go green, Europe needs electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and permanent magnets. And China controls almost all of these. China dominates 80% of the global battery supply chain, and it controls rare earth refining. When the United States restricts technology exports to China, Beijing responds by tightening exports of strategic materials. And who panics the most? Not the resource-rich United States, but resource-poor Europe. On top of that, China is flooding the world with low-cost high-tech products due to domestic overcapacity. Chinese electric vehicles pour into European ports at half the price of a Volkswagen or Renault. European manufacturers cry out. They want to impose tariffs, but they are afraid. They fear that angering Beijing will trigger retaliation against French luxury goods or German machinery. This is the classic deadlock that leaves Europe crushed between two giants. If Europe opens its market, its industry is overwhelmed by Chinese goods. If Europe closes its market under United States pressure, China cuts off critical materials and its billion-person consumer market. China knows this weakness well. It plays the divide-and-conquer game masterfully. It rolls out the red carpet for Germany's chancellor or France's president, offering lucrative deals to each nation individually, preventing the European Union from speaking with one voice. While Washington uses sticks, Beijing uses carrots coated with sedatives. And in between, Europe is torn into pieces, easy to manipulate and even easier to corner. The collapse of the Wandel-Dirch-Handel model changed through trade. Germany once believed in a diplomatic philosophy called Wandel-Dirch-Handel, the idea that through trade, adversaries become interdependent and therefore peaceful. This was the compass guiding Europe's dependence on Russian energy and the Chinese market. But the saga of the United States and China fighting while Europe takes the hit has proven that this philosophy is dead. Trade cannot prevent Cold Wars or Hot Wars. Trade has been weaponized. When the United States turns the dollar and the banking system into sanctioned weapons, and when China weaponizes rare earth supply chains, Europe suddenly realizes it is like a vegetarian entering a tiger cage. Europe has no tools to play this brutal power game. The European Union is a rule-based union. It excels at drafting privacy regulations and environmental standards. But in a world where superpowers tear up rules to achieve their goals, Europe's rules mean nothing. Imagine a boxing match. The United States and China are two heavyweight fighters, willing to play dirty, bite ears, hit below the belt. Europe is the elderly referee standing in the middle, blowing the whistle in vain. And who gets punched the most? The referee. That is the perfect metaphor for Europe being crushed between two giants. Europe's geopolitical naivety has left it trailing in the global technology race. The United States has Silicon Valley, China has Shenzhen, Europe has regulatory agencies. Europe does not produce technology giants in AI or semiconductors. It only finds American firms. It has no leverage at the negotiating table. When two giants clash, the unarmed spectator is always the victim. The price of illusory strategic autonomy. French President Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly called for strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe should become a third pole, independent of the United States or China. It sounds noble, almost de Gaulle-like, but reality is much harsher. Strategic autonomy requires two things: energy independence and military independence. Europe has neither. After cutting off Russian gas, Europe now buys liquefied natural gas (LNG) from the United States at prices 3 to 4 times higher. This is not autonomy. It is simply replacing dependence on an authoritarian supplier with dependence on a transactional ally. And once that ally prioritizes its own national interest, America first, Europe learns that the noose has simply changed color, not loosened. Militarily, the Ukraine war exposed Europe's weaknesses. Decades of budget cuts in exchange for peace dividends left its arsenals empty. Europe must rely on the United States. And when you must beg someone to protect your life, you lose the right to negotiate economics on equal terms. This structural weakness makes the scenario of the United States and China fighting, while Europe takes the hit almost inevitable. Europe wants to stand tall, but its backbone energy and security has eroded. We are witnessing a continent rich in wealth, but poor in hard power. A beautiful living museum facing the risk of becoming the backyard of history. Europe is at risk of becoming an elegant spectacle, not a geopolitical actor, as it stands crushed between two giants. Europe's economy as a hostage in a battle for global dominance. As many of you know, Europe's economy was once compared to a German tank, durable, precise, and powerful. But today, that tank is losing its tracks. One track is being pulled away by United States subsidies, the other by China's flood of cheap goods. The result is a machine that spins in circles, throwing up smoke in helpless frustration. Germany, when the industrial heart stops beating. To understand why Europe is being crushed between two giants, look at Germany, the economic engine of the continent. For 20 years, the formula for German success was simple: cheap Russian energy, endless demand from China, and security provided by the United States. A perfect formula until it collapsed completely. Once Russian gas was cut off, Germany's entire business model fell apart. Industrial titans like BASF, the backbone of German manufacturing, announced major cuts at home and began shifting production to China and the United States. Why? Because energy in Germany now costs 3 to 4 times more than in America. You cannot produce steel, chemicals, or cars competitively when your electricity bill is several times higher than your rivals. That is basic arithmetic, and this is where the reality of the United States and China fighting, while Europe takes the hit, becomes most brutal. The United States sells liquefied natural gas (LNG) to Europe at friendly prices. Friendly meaning painfully expensive, draining profits from European companies. We are witnessing what economists call de-industrialization. It sounds academic, but in plain language, it means this: factories are shutting down, workers are being laid off, and capital is fleeing. Germany, once the workshop of Europe, risks becoming an industrial museum. The Inflation Reduction Act, a pickpocketing blow from an ally. If China hits Europe with cheap goods, the United States hits Europe with money, lots of money. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, was a shock to Brussels. The United States launched $369 billion in green subsidies, inviting companies from around the world. Come to America. Build your factories here. We will give you money, land, and near zero taxes. Europe's reaction: panic. They called it unfair protectionist. French President Macron flew to Washington to complain. The United States president smiled and said, "Sorry, my friend, America first." The result, a major investment exodus. Volkswagen, BMW, Intel, and many others announced expansions in North America instead of Europe. Europe is being drained of capital and talent. And in this scenario of Europe being crushed between two giants, Europe cannot match United States subsidies. It is bound by its own strict fiscal rules. The United States uses money to buy industrial futures. Europe uses legal text to write formal protests. The electric vehicle war, the master outpacked by the student. Nothing symbolizes Europe's downfall more clearly than the car industry. Once the continent's crown jewel, it is now being overtaken by China. China quietly built dominance in electric vehicles, EVs, over many years. Its cars have better batteries, smarter software, and prices 30 to 40% lower than European cars. Here is the irony. Europe pushed aggressively for electric vehicle adoption, banning gasoline cars from 2035. But when European consumers go shopping for EVs, they find European models too expensive, while Chinese models, BYD, MG, and others are affordable. Europe fell into its own trap. Its green policies paved the way for China to conquer its market. Now, the European Union is rushing to investigate Chinese EV subsidies, preparing to impose tariffs. But this is a double-edged sword. If Europe raises tariffs, China retaliates. And remember, German automakers sell 30 to 40% of their cars in China. If Beijing sneezes, the German auto sector catches pneumonia instantly. This is the clearest proof that when the United States and China fight, Europe takes the hit. The United States demands Europe reduce dependence on China, but Europe cannot decouple without committing economic suicide. It is trapped between Washington's political pressure and Beijing's market pressure. The green energy trap and a new form of dependence. Europe enjoys calling itself the greenest continent on Earth, but maintaining that greenness comes with enormous costs and dependencies. To install massive wind farms and solar fields, Europe needs materials, and guess who controls them? 98% of rare earth imports into Europe come from China. 93% of magnesium comes from China. 60% of lithium refining happens in China. Europe is trapped between two giants in the cruelest way. It just escaped the energy trap of Russian oil and gas, only to walk voluntarily into the raw materials trap of China. The United States knows this and uses it as leverage. Washington says, if you do not want to depend on China, buy our technology and our gas. Europe has no third option. It lacks natural resources like the United States or Russia, and it cannot control supply chains like China. Inflation and the quiet impoverishment of the middle class. All of these macro pressures lead to one daily reality for ordinary Europeans. Life is getting harder. Europe's inflation is more persistent than America's. Why? Because Europe's energy shock is direct and brutal. High energy prices seep into bread, milk, and every service. Real wages fall. People feel the erosion of the welfare model. Governments have fewer funds as economies stagnate. The protests by French farmers and German railway workers are symptoms of a deeper illness. While the United States enjoys an AI and tech boom, and China enjoys manufacturing dominance, Europe struggles not to fall into recession. The United States and China fighting while Europe takes the hit is not just geopolitical theory. It is the pain of a mother seeing grocery prices soar. It is the fear of a factory worker unsure if his job will exist tomorrow. A social earthquake and the uncertain future of an old continent. Europe's economic picture is far from bright. The continent is being hollowed out. Capital flows to the United States. Markets fall into the hands of China. But if you think the economy is the worst part, it is not. Because when pockets empty, tempers flare. The real nightmare is social instability, the rise of the far right, and the slow unraveling of the European dream. Will Europe fracture? Will the European Union dissolve under the pressure of two giants? The signs are already here. When stomachs are empty, minds become cloudy. When electricity bills rise faster than wages, faith in liberal democracy weakens. Europe today resembles a pressure cooker. Below is the fire of the United States and China fighting while Europe takes the hit. Above is a jammed relief valve called social welfare. The rise of rage, the far-right surge. Look at Europe's political map. It is changing color. From Italy to the Netherlands to France and even Germany, far-right parties are rising like never before. Why? Not because Europeans suddenly became more hostile or xenophobic, but because they are afraid. They fear becoming poorer. When factories close because they cannot compete with China. When energy prices soar because of American sanctions and geopolitical decisions. The working class feels abandoned. They watch elites in Brussels drive luxury cars, meet in climate-controlled conference rooms, and preach about climate goals while ordinary workers do not know how to fill their gas tanks the next day. At that moment, populists arrive and say exactly what these people want to hear. Why must we sacrifice for America's wars? Why must we lose jobs because of China's cheap goods? Our nation should come first. The reality of Europe being crushed between two giants has created fertile ground for extreme nationalism. Europe's 70-year legacy of political stability is cracking. A divided Europe will never negotiate on equal terms with the United States or China. This becomes a vicious cycle that reinforces the continent's weakness. Farmers revolt and the death of the Green Dream. Images of tractors blocking the Eiffel Tower or the Brandenburg Gate are not mere protests. They are screams of desperation. Europe wants to become the model green continent, but who pays for that greenness? Farmers and small businesses. They must follow the strictest environmental rules in the world, while the EU opens its doors to cheap agricultural imports from Ukraine or South America, and to industrial goods from China made under much looser environmental standards. European farmers realize they are the direct victims of the scenario where the United States and China fight while Europe takes the hit. They are forced to shoulder the cost of global energy transition, while the profits go to United States energy giants and Chinese battery manufacturers. The social contract is cracking. Citizens no longer trust that the European Union protects them. Brussels appears as a bureaucratic machine obeying orders from across the Atlantic or acting naively toward Chinese interests. A union of shared beads and different dreams. Never has Europe been this divided internally. French President Macron calls for strategic autonomy, a European army, independence from the United States. German Chancellor Scholz remains silent, trying to save Germany's economy by pleasing Washington while refusing to cut ties with Beijing. Eastern European nations, like Poland or the Baltics, openly distrust Brussels and rely entirely on the United States. They buy United States tanks, United States aircraft, and invite United States troops, ignoring French calls to buy European equipment. The phrase Europe being crushed between two giants is even more painful when Europe's own fingers no longer form a fist. Each finger points in a different direction. The United States and China see this and smile quietly. They divide Europe piece by piece. China invests in Hungary as its gateway to the EU. The United States pours money into Poland as its frontline outpost. Europe is torn apart to serve outside interests. What future awaits Europe? A museum or a power? What are the possible futures? Optimistic scenario, 10% chance. Europe wakes up, launches a real federal revolution, unifies armies and budgets, becomes the United States of Europe, a true third superpower. With the rise of the far right, this is nearly impossible. Pessimistic scenario, 40% chance. The EU slowly unravels. It becomes an empty shell. Nations return to protectionism and closed borders. Europe reverts to the pre-World War II environment of suspicion and conflict. Realistic scenario, 50% chance. Europe becomes a museum. It turns into a giant Disneyland. Beautiful, historic, wonderful food, a shopping paradise for wealthy Americans and Chinese who come for Gucci bags and Ferrari cars. The last things Europe still excels at. But real power, technology, finance, military strength will sit in Washington and Beijing. Europe becomes the Venice of the 21st century. Beautiful and romantic but sinking, powerless to decide its own fate. The story of the United States and China fighting while Europe takes the hit is not a comedy. It is a geopolitical warning. It teaches us that in a world of sharks, being a gentle singing dolphin is not enough. You either grow sharper teeth or swim faster. Europe slept on its past glory. It allowed itself to be crushed between two giants because it lost its most basic instinct, self-reliance. And what lesson can we, watching from afar, take from this? Never hand your destiny to someone else, no matter how sweet the promises may sound. And speaking of self-reliance, nothing is more self-reliant than taking control of whether your clothes stay dry no matter the weather. Europe cannot control geopolitical storms, but you can control the climate inside your closet with this miraculous clothes drying cabinet. Equip your home with real autonomy today.